Well, my first memories were living at the shop. We had the shop, and between the shop and the bakery and around the shop were the living quarters. So we had a couple of bedrooms above the shop and the front room, which was the room we only used at Christmas, where the piano was kept. And so we lived there, and the bakery, as I say, was attached to the house. So I think we lived in Frieswood Road actually until I was about 2, and then we moved to the shop. So I only remember the shop, and I lived there until I was 16, and then we moved out. So that was 1960. We moved away from there, lived in Seabridge Road, and then the bakery was closed down on Christmas Eve, December 1964. The name of the bakery was Stones Brothers Crown Bakery, Friars Street, Newcastle. I noticed at the Brampton there, they've got Lower Street, Stones Bakery Lower Street. It in fact was Stones Brothers Friars Street. No, they didn't start the bakery. Their father started the bakery. I'm not sure exactly when, but it would have been in the late 1800s. And his name was Arthur John Stones. And then he his wife died. I think she was in her 40s. I think of cancer, and so I never knew her. And well, I never knew him actually because, and I think it was 1928. He went out with a rep in his car, and they had a crash, and he was killed. My granddad was killed out at Baldwin's Gate, I believe. And I think that was 1928, which would have made Dad, he was 22, and his brother, John, was 5 years younger, so he was only 17. So basically they were thrown in the deep end. The father had got no savings. The story goes that he was a bit of a gambler, and after his wife died, a bit of a ladies' man, and I believe he used to race a pony and trap from Newcastle to Market Drayton and back. So he used to gamble on that. So it turned out that they basically got nothing, and I suppose they still got one or two customers and what have you. But again, the story goes, and I'm not sure how accurate this is, but Dad said to me that he never ever borrowed any money, but he did have to make it the first batch of bread after the father died. He had to borrow a sack or 2 sacks of flour from Burgess's bakery, which was just down on Blackfriars Road, just below our bakery. Yes, yes, they were working in the bakery. They had no choice, basically. The father said, "You'll work in the bakery," because Dad always said he wanted to be a chemist. I was never sure whether he meant a pharmacist or a scientific chemist, but he said he always wanted to be a chemist. But at the age of 14, I think when he left school, his dad said, "Oh no, you know, you're not going on to further education or anything like that. You're going to work in the bakery," and that was it. He had no choice, which he, I think, resented to some extent. But he became eventually a master baker, which he always said to me. He said, "If anybody asks you what your dad does, don't just say baker." He said, "I'm a master baker." Dad was, as I say, it was Stone's brothers, so Dad's brother, who was 5 years younger than Dad, um, uh, he, Dad's brother, tended to make the cakes and the fancy goods, and Dad looked after the bread and went out delivering. Various shops in the area, private houses, a lot of the collieries he delivered to the canteens. I remember Park House Colliery, Holditch, Silverdale, of course, Leasit, Woolstanton, Chatterley Whitfield. He delivered to all of those. Sometimes I went out there in the van with him as a young kid. Um, well, obviously there was Dad, his brother, Uncle John. There were the two main fixtures, Frank and George. And then they had probably two, three, maybe four. So you're probably talking regularly 8 people, maybe up to 10 people, that sort of. Then you've got the van boy, so that was extra. Uh, I did bits and pieces, but wasn't paid until I always used to. We had two yards at the bakery, and when I was old enough, I used to, on a Saturday morning, I used to sweep the big yard at the top where they kept the vans, make all that clean. Then there was a lower yard by the house, which I cleaned. There were two toilets, men's and ladies' toilets, that the staff and we used, which were outside in outhouses. So I had to clean those and clean the house and the bakery windows, and I got 10 shillings for that. So. Didn't see a great deal of Dad because he was always working. I mean, I suppose I always say he worked sort of 6.5 days a week, and usually more than 12 hours a day. So really sort of Sunday morning when he'd lie in bed reading the papers and telling us young kids stories in bed. I always remember that. And then he'd sort of start work Sunday evening, really, because he had to light the fire that heated the ovens. It was a coke fired oven, and there were two quite large ovens, one on top of the other. And I've never thought about it since. I never really understood how they regulated the heat in the ovens, because you literally just shoved coke into the fire there, and it just heated the oven. So I guess the top oven was hotter than the one at the bottom, and depending on how hot it was, I suppose they determined how long they kept the bread in there for, or whatever. And with the bakery was on 2 floors, and the sacks of flour on the top floor, and Dad used to mix the flour, yeast, etc., and put it in a big revolving drum on the top floor, and that would turn for I don't know how long, half an hour, whatever. When it was the right consistency, he used to open the doors of the drum, tip it upside down, and all the dough fell out into a chute, which then shot down into a trough downstairs, which was basically a big wooden container lined with metal that stood by the oven, by the side of the oven, so it was warm. They would then cover that in flour sacks and let it rise. And then after it had risen, then they used to cut it up into whatever size of bread they were going to make. £2 tins, £1 tins. They made cottage loaves. They also made hovis, but not so much hovis. It was mainly the big £2 tin bread that they made. As I say, they sold that in the shop, and they also delivered to, as I say, the various shops and private houses and what have you around the area. Uncle John tended to stay downstairs, and he did all the cake mixes and that sort of thing. And then we also made pies, which was, I suppose, quite interesting. They used to start upstairs with the pies for some reason. They'd start with a ball of pastry. I don't know what weight or size it was, but they used to fashion a small cup with the thumbs and forefingers to make a rough shaped cup, and then they'd get a wooden block, a circular wooden block, and push that into the cup, and then they'd use the fingers somehow to rear the pastry up the side of the cup until they got the right height of cup, and then, and I'm sure this wouldn't be allowed these days, to get it off the wooden block, they'd blow down the side of the because I'm sure health and safety these days wouldn't allow that. I mean, they might not have allowed it in those days, I don't know, but that's what they did. Then they put all these cups into a big tray, and I'm not sure how many cups it would have held, but I would guess, I don't know, something like 6 dozen or so. That tray then went downstairs, and one of the chaps who, as I say, was always with the business, I was always fascinated to watch him fill the cups with the pie mix, which I don't know what went into the mix, but obviously it was meat, it was seasoning and that sort of thing, and it was quite a sort of semi-sloppy mix, and he'd get a big scoop with his left hand into the mixing bowl, and he'd have an enormous amount, and because it was fairly sloppy, it would tend to dribble over so he'd sort of keep this moving with his left hand, and then he'd take a quantity out of that and literally throw it into the pie, and he'd get the right amount virtually every time and never miss, and he was doing this. It was absolutely amazing, the skill that was involved. And then, you know, when they fill the pies, they put the little circular pastry lid on the top and pinch them around and then put them in the oven, and they're wonderful pies. Friday night used to be a big pie night because they delivered to lots of pubs and clubs in the area, and Friday night it was up to, I have 2 sisters, one is older, I'm in the middle of the two age-wise, and we used to pack pies in cardboard boxes on the Friday night prior to delivery to the pubs and clubs, so we'd be sort of getting burned fingers sort of putting the pies in the boxes, which I remember very well. I think there was a company, I mean, I've got my dad's old books in there, and there's a company called Paul Brothers, which I think were from Merseyside somewhere. I think, well, I know Rank Hovis McDougall, I think, produced the flour, and presumably these Paul Brothers, they actually carried the flour to the bakery, and they were in large sacks. I don't know what the weight of the sacks were, but the lorry used to park in Friars Street outside the big double gates to the big yard that we had, and then Dad and his co-workers would get the sack of flour onto the back of the head and put their arm out like that with the sack of flour over the top and walk upstairs into the bakery. So they must have been pretty fit to do that, walking up these stairs. Yeah, so it was right, Rank Hovis McDougall flour, and of course Hovis, the Hovis flour, which I suppose is wholemeal flour these days. They made small Hovises, which I used to like. And well, we ate lots of bread, as you can imagine, as a family. It was all sort of free, if anything is free to us. Easter, we always used to do hot crust buns. Again, we used to help pack the hot crust buns, which sometimes, the hot sugar on that, we always ended up with burned fingers. We never got paid for it either, which is, looking back, was a bit of a pain, but there we go. There was also a stage where we made crisps, Stone's crisps, and that lasted for, I don't know, maybe a year or two. It obviously wasn't that successful, so in the end they gave up. But that was another job us kids used to do. They'd have their own packets printed with Stone's crisps on the front. And the crisps were put into the packet, and then these were given to us kids, and we were given little squares of blue paper, and we had a little plastic spoon that we measured a quantity of salt and put it in the middle of the blue paper and just wrapped it round, put it in the crisp packet, and again licked the tab on the crisp packet to stick them down. Again, very hygienic. And the other story he used to tell me, when he was, I think before he left school, when he was younger than 14 obviously, they had a van, but of course it was a horse-drawn van in those days when his dad ran the business in the early 1900s, late 1800s. Well, no, Dad was born in 1906, so to be some time after that, obviously. And they kept a horse in a field somewhere down there, and Dad, before he went to school, had to get up and catch the horse. And he said this horse was an absolute bugger. He said, I'd get within couple of feet of it and it'd suddenly charge off, and he said many's a time I just sat down in the field and cried my eyes out. He said, but I had to stay there till I caught it, and I couldn't go to school or anything until then, so that was another little anecdote from Dad. Yeah. The A34 dual carriageway was built. Before that, we were sort of almost on the corner of Friars Street and Lower Street. We were just above Lower Street there. So Lower Street and Goose Street was made into the A34 dual carriageway. And basically the bakery was in the way. So they were offered alternative premises or compensation by the government. And because I wasn't going to go into the business, I was the only boy at the time. Uncle John had a daughter, and I had two sisters, and they weren't interested. And it was just assumed that I wouldn't take over the business. I mean, it was never ever discussed, quite honestly, not with me anyway. So whether it was discussed between Mum and Dad, and oh no, John wouldn't want to go into the business, blah blah blah. And thinking about it, I don't think, if they'd have asked me, do you want to take over the business, I think I would have said no anyway, because then I was about 18, 19, and I realised what hard work it was, and I thought, well, I can make that sort of money doing an easier job, you see. So in the end, they took compensation from the government. The business itself was bought out by another bakery company at the time called Wonderloaf. Some people may remember that. So it closed down, and Dad, who was 58 at the time, retired, and Uncle John didn't want to retire, and he went selling insurance for several years, and that was the end of an era, as they say.